Globespan is a Guyanese dialogue moving towards the realization of one nation in one Guyana. It's a platform that offers an all-inclusive discussion with the pros, the cons, the ones that have taken a side, and the ones that stand in the middle. Globespan believes agreeing and disagreeing are part of the nation building. Globespan believes that every Guyanese voice is part of the nation building. As we span the globe for voices from the diaspora and those living home, we stand on our commitment that we are all Guyanese working towards one nation in one Guyana.
This land is our land now.
As the world turns on its axis, bringing changes, we as Guyanese must adapt to those changes for a better Guyana for all. Globespan stands on its axis with its belief that one nation, one Guyana, one destiny must include voices from all corners of Guyana.
We ain't giving up no river that belong to we. Not one blue sake, not one rice grain.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us for another edition of Globespan 24/7, owned and operated by Mr. Noir Singh, who is also joining us tonight. Tonight, we will talk about the 13th Parliament, Guyana at the Crossroads, and we're going to define those terms as well. Joining us tonight for tonight's discussion is the former president of Guyana, Mr. Donald Rambutar, who needs no introduction, and Mr. Vincent Alexander, a common face, a regular face on this program. Mr. Alexander is the chairman of IDPADA, ITPADA G. And I'll ask him to talk about that in a few minutes. In fact, why don't you tell us a little about ITPADA G, Mr. Vincent Alexander?
Well, in fact, ITPADA G is the acronym for the International Decade for People of African Descent, Assembly Guyana. It's a non-governmental organization that was established for the purpose of commemorating the decade for the people of African descent, which was declared by the United Nations, commencing in 2015 on to 2024, a decade which has been extended for another 10 years. So it's really an umbrella organization for the African Guyanese organizations as we seek to pursue the objectives of the decade, which the theme of which is justice, recognition, justice, and development for the people of African descent.
Well, thank you, sir. And Mr. Alexander is the chairman of that grouping, that NGO. And also joining us is the former president of Guyana. And once you're president, you're always a president, Mr. Donald Rambutar. So tonight we're talking about the 13th Parliament, and the sub-theme is Guyana at the Crossroads. So just for definition purposes, the 13th Parliament. Now, people may ask, well, what is the 13th Parliament? Well, anytime there is an election, Parliament is called, and that is referred to a parliament. So you have the first Parliament after the election, the second Parliament after another election, and so on and so forth. And I take it that this election that was held on September 1st was the 13th election, and therefore you had the 13th Parliament, which met last Monday and will meet over a period of time. I think it's in recess now. When it will be called again, I don't know. I'm not certain. Am I right, Mr. Rambutar and Mr. Vincent Alexander, both of whom served in Parliament?
Yeah, I think you are. I think you are on the mark there.
Yeah. Mr. Alexander?
What you said that I wasn't aware of is that they have actually gone into recess.
Oh, I don't know. I just assumed. I may be wrong. I don't know if they have gone into recess or they've taken a break or what the right term is for after that swearing-in session on Monday.
Well, the Parliament, for all intents and purposes, is now in session. It's just for them to call the next meeting.
Okay. All right. Good. But thanks for the clarification, right? And so then, and the sub team, another sub team is as Guyana at the crossroads. So crossroads in English language, if I understand it correctly, is when things are intersecting, and for all practical purposes, we'll be talking about Guyana is at some critical juncture that some solutions need to be proposed to address whatever these critical issues may be. And we are all, I suppose, are familiar with issues right now in Parliament about choosing an opposition leader and so on and so forth. So again, thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. And just before we came on the air, we were talking about New York City's election that was held yesterday, and elections are also held in the neighboring state of New Jersey, in Virginia, and some various propositions in California. So if these gentlemen so wish to bring up these points, there is no limitation. So gentlemen, thank you again very much. Let's open with Mr. Donald Ramutar. Mr. Ramutar, Guyana at the crossroads. You want to
I don't know why you choose that team, the Guyana at the crossroads. I know exactly what you mean. Because I mean, crossroads mean there's some kind of critical junction or so forth. I don't know if Guyana is at a crossroad. I don't know exactly what you organizers had in mind to.
Do you think the parliament is at a crossroad?
The what?
Do you think the parliament is at a crossroad?
The Guyana Parliament?
Yeah.
I don't think so. I mean, I don't think it's at a crossroad. It's called. It's now called into session. I noticed that they haven't elected the leader of the opposition. I don't know why they didn't do that. I think they should have done that at the first sitting of the parliament. It's not in the law necessarily, but traditionally, I think that is how it is, that the leader of the opposition is elected at the first meeting. At least when I was there, that was happening for all the time I was there from 1992 to 2011. They were doing that, but why they haven't done it so now, I haven't heard any proper explanation.
Mr. Alexander?
Well, indeed, the question of getting the crossroads, we need to have a definitional position on that. And I would assume that what is intended is to look at the fact that we have had elections, that we have a new government, that we have a parliament that is constituted in a manner that has not been constituted sometime, in that you have three parties, a parliament in which, for the first time, the PNC, so to speak, does not occupy the number one or the number two position. And that can, in fact, contextualize what probably is meant by the crossroads, as well as the question of the leader of the opposition, the prospective potential leader of the opposition, being someone who has been not only sanctioned, but someone who's been indicted and is likely to be extradited. All of that presents significant questions about where we're at in terms of our parliamentary operation and what will eventuate in the circumstance.
Yeah, I think those are two very good critical points that we can address, Mr. Ramutar. So, and you already raised one, Mr. Ramutar, about the leader of the opposition being elected. So generally, I don't know if either one of you want to talk. How is the leader of the opposition for public consumption? How is that person chosen?
The speaker of the National Assembly calls a meeting with the members of the opposition parliamentarians. They are parliamentarians in the opposition, and they elect from among themselves the leader of the opposition. That's how it goes.
And is there a specified time frame for it? Is it
No. As I said, there's no specified, there's nothing written down, but the tradition is that it's normally done at the first sitting of the parliament.
okay? So whoever is not supporting the government, they get together and
Yeah,
elect someone among themselves. The majority, there may be 3 or 4 candidates. Whoever gets the most votes becomes the leader of the opposition. Is that how it works?
that's how it works.
Mr. Alexander, is that correct? Any clarification?
Yes, and I would add that indeed there is no specified time frame, but I think that these things have a logic. The parliament has convened, they've done the first order of business, that is to swear in the parliamentarians. They've all been sworn in. They've identified a speaker, they've identified a deputy speaker. One would assume that they would not convene to conduct regular business without electing or identifying the leader of the opposition. One would assume that, in a sense, tells you the framework within which, from a time perspective, this exercise has to be undertaken. So I would be surprised if the parliament was to convene to do regular business and not finalize the act of constituting the parliament. And so, for me, electing that leader becomes a critical next step, as much as the appointment of the committees should be another critical next step, and that those things should come before actual business is undertaken by the parliament.
Okay. And you had brought up the point before that for the very first time, the PNC or APNU does not occupy the number 1 or number 2 position in the parliament. I don't know if you want to address that, and then we'll ask Mr. Ramutar to talk a little about it. How did that come about? What
Well, but that is a result of the elections, simply a result of the elections. One may want to discuss why is it you had that kind of result, but it is clearly a result of the election. And as a result of the election, with the Win Party commanding the second largest bloc in the parliament, and with the process for identifying the leader of the opposition being one where the opposition parliamentarians have to elect that person, it is more than likely, and has been the convention, that the party that commands the largest number of votes will simply vote for the person of their choice. And the person of the choice has normally been the person who is the leader of the list. So it suggests that unless things are done in a different manner, that Azaruddin would be elected leader of the opposition. Now, there are some other issues which one may want to look at. We know that he has been interdicted in the US. We know that he's now before the court for extradition processes. And the question is, if he were not to be on bail, how would that affect the parliament being able to identify someone who is not physically available to be leader of the opposition? But he is at this point in time on bail and therefore physically available. And so one has to assume that he will continue to be on bail, and to ask the question that if he's not continuously on bail, how would that affect the next step, which is the election of the leader of the opposition? In fact, not affect that, but affect his availability for that office.
Right. So you mentioned something that the leader of the opposition is very, very critical, regardless of who that person is. And we'll come back to that in a minute. Mr. Ramutar, you want to address this whole issue that Mr. Alexander raised before, which is that very first time in the history of Guyana since 1957 to now, the PNC APNU has not been in the number one or number two position in Parliament.
Well, I think that that probably should have a whole separate program to discuss because there will be many factors. I don't think that this is something that happened. The judge said overnight. Yes, it happened overnight in the sense that the last election threw up. This is the result of the last election threw up. But why did it happen? How did it happen? Why is it that a large amount of people who normally voted for the PNC APNU in the past um, decided not to vote for them this time? It would be another very interesting discussion um, that would be really to analyze what has happened there. It's going to be really a full, long discussion needed because I think there might be a lot of different opinions as far as that is concerned. I have my own views
But
about it.
you could give your view. I mean, we have a lot of time.
No, I think that that they have gone into a crisis long ago. Um, from the time even before, just at the time when the former leader of the party, Forbes Burnham, died. I think from then they started to go into the crisis, and they really hasn't. They have not really up to now. I don't believe they have totally solved that issue of in the party, and they kept going from one crisis to the other, and it has reached this stage at this point in time. That's one aspect I would say. The second aspect is that um, I think that they have. My own view is that they have um, been making some very serious mistake, particularly in their propaganda type of work and so forth. That the PNC had become very accustomed to organizing and mobilizing on the basis of they think they always had a ethnic bloc to rely on, and they tend to have a lot of emphasis more on um, organizing Afro-Guyanese to take to the streets or to mobilize or to vote for them and so on and so forth. But and to do that, they generally have to try to put the PPP as a party that it was discriminating against black people and so forth. But that doesn't correspond to reality on the ground, and I think that has contributed very greatly to their being discredited in the eyes of people. And I think that had a big impact on what happened. Apart from that, things have changed a lot considerably. A lot of the people who that propaganda used to appeal to, a lot of them have passed on. There's a totally new generation in place now, and they don't have that. They don't have that kind of appeal, particularly when their appeal don't coincide with the reality that exists on the ground. Because whatever you might think about the PVP nowadays, the one thing that has been consistent from the very beginning to now is that they're anti-racism, that they have always been fighting for unity and against race and so forth. The PVP always at least at one time had more strongly felt that class was far more important than race. And even in the worst times, it always appealed for unity and rejected the idea that the PPP was an Indian party. It always felt that its position was more national party and always appealed for unity of the working people. So I think that part of the problem with the PNC is that as I mentioned, the propaganda don't coincide, and they got discredited a lot in that way, and therefore the appeal lost some of its shine.
Okay, so you identify two issues: one being the leadership crisis, and two, it's or discredited propaganda. I'm sure there must be others as well. I don't know if Mr. Alexander agrees. Mr. Alexander, you want to comment?
Yes, I would wish to comment. I think that the first thing that we ought to recognize is that although the PNC did not garner the number of votes from the constituency that traditionally garnered those votes from at the 2025 elections, it should be noted that those voters have not in any mass gone to the PPP. And therefore, whatever has happened is not a juxtaposition between the PNC and the PPP because they seem to have retained a similar disposition to the PPP as in the past. And therefore, it has to be more a question of the relationship between the PNC and its constituency. I think that is what one has to examine, what has gone wrong with that relationship. I think that I would contend that in many regards, the expectations of the constituency in terms of the kinds of actions that the PNC should have taken and APNU were not taken. And there were lots of people who saw Mr. Norton as someone who would be far more aggressive in terms of what he would have done. And in many regards were disappointed they didn't get that kind of aggression out of him. I think there's also a fallout from the 2015-2020 regime. I think that Jagdeo has taken tremendous advantage of this contention that the party did not look after his constituency. What that means is another question, but he seemed to have presented that in the light that they didn't provide materially for their constituency and therefore the people are disgruntled. And juxtapose it to him providing for his constituency. And when one sees the manner in which he would have provided his constituency, one can see a question of values arises here, because the provision which he talks about, in my humble opinion, has a lot to do with acts that are not congruent with good governance and where the country needs to go. But those values seem to have become pervasive in the society, and he's exploited those values. And so that the people who supported the PNC have turned to somewhere else where they think that those values could be now manifest, since they seem not to have been served by the PNC. And that, to me, is a very large reason for what has occurred. You've heard Mr. Norton himself saying things like money matters in his review. That might be a little simplistic, but certainly it does occur to me that there is a disgruntlement with the PNC, and that disgruntlement has to do with them not having delivered. But I would argue that them not having delivered is in a context that in some regards represents an emerging ethos in the country, where delivery means that you just do for your people what you have to do without reference to issues of good governance. And therefore, it makes it easy for them to go to a win where people are saying, well, how could they go there from a standpoint of values? And I'm saying that we have a situation where there seems to be a shift, ethos in the country that embraces those kinds of values, and the PNC seem not to have embraced them in terms of the Granger government. And therefore people are saying, well, you didn't deliver to us, and we're going to go where we have seen delivery, and where we think delivery can take place. But they certainly have not changed their disposition to the PPP, and that is evident, I humbly submit, by virtue of the elections. And I would wish to develop that theme a bit more as we go on, from the perspective of the where to Guyana, based on where we are at.
Okay, I think that's fair.
I would, if I may, I
It's about
partially agree with Vincent. Some of these, for instance, I partially agree with him. I agree with him that I think probably what accelerated this rapid decline had to do with the performance of the PNC up new when they were in government from 2015 to 2020. I think they performed really on the par, and um, and displayed some tendencies as far as governance is concerned that was very detrimental to themselves in a way, in many ways, because I don't think they got a lot of achieved. I don't think they had proper vision and of what to do. A lot of things that was to be done. As just quickly as an example, um, one of the last things I did when I was president it was to negotiate this new road that the government just built now from Ogle going through on the East Bank. We built the ferry to Northwest area, um, and other projects like that. And the PNC didn't take them. I don't know why. I understand they were in negotiations. That those things were there for them to and they didn't take them. They didn't develop, make any impact on big development and so forth. They on the odd that's one aspect of it. As far as Mr. Norton not being aggressive enough, I don't think he had the condition to be aggressive. As I said, that generation, that clicking your finger and trying to get a lot of people on the basis of race to come out, most of them have passed, and people have begun to see things a bit more different now, and they were able to judge the performance of the PPP compared to the PNC. And you must admit, whatever you might say about the PPP from 2020 to 2025, our development was tremendous. And even before that, from 2006 right down to 2015, the country kept growing all the time, even though not as rapid as the last 5 years, but the economy was growing all the time. And I don't think they learned the lessons of how the PNC, one of the reasons that, not the only reason, but one of the reasons that the PNC got back into the government in 2015. And I think that one of the reasons that they got back into the government in 2015 is that Mr. President Granger was able to create an image of him being a peaceful man, and he believing in peaceful politics. And I think that is the general feeling now spreading out into the whole country. And it didn't coincide with I think the PNC totally misread the situation. And then looking for a leader to be aggressive like Norton, and then he couldn't because he didn't have the conditions to be aggressive as they thought it would have been. I think they were thinking about big street demonstrations and so forth, but they had no conditions for that. And as a result of that, Norton got damaged in that process and so forth. So those are some of the other things. As far as the votes gone, the main thing is that the people has broken away and vote for someone else. I think it could also be interpreted like a kind of a transition. A lot of people were not ready yet to vote for the PPP because of decades and decades of racial propaganda. It still has its impact. I'm not saying it doesn't have any impact. It has lost all its potency. They still have some potency there, but it doesn't have the same kind of potency. And the very fact that the people feel that they could vote against the PNC tells us that there is a transition. It could be a transition taking place that can very well end up with the PPP in the future, unless the opposition, the PNC, comes out now with some strong other type of program that can attract people back to them in some ways. And if they don't do that, then I think it could happen. And then it's not true that the PPP didn't get African Guyanese votes. They got more than before. They had an increase in the definite increase in the Afro Guyanese voting for the PPP. Probably with the exception of 1961 and probably in some amount in 64. But in this election in particular, when we were seeing it regular, it was a kind of a gradual build-up. But at this last election, I think the PPP got quite a bit of. I mean, I think the PPP should have gotten even more votes because of their performance in 2020 to 2025. But the fact that they got some not insignificant amount of Afro votes tells its own story. It tells that the PNC, I don't think, is reading the country. They don't have their finger on the pulse. Maybe they're too consumed in the internal struggle that they're having, and they didn't really get to put their finger on the pulse of what is taking place in the society.
I agree.
If I could have a little last word on this matter.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
My own analysis is that in the face of the level of poverty which have affected people, that there's a lack of appreciation or value for what was the strength of the Granger government. I would contend that indeed materially the Granger government did not kind of deliver what people would have needed in the context of the poverty the society is faced with. And the question of the ethos in our society, which has moved away from certain levels of morality and things like that, lent to a movement which undervalued the progress in terms of governance, which I think was a stronger element of the Granger government, the whole question of governance, the way in which we saw changes in terms of the behavioral patterns of the police and things like that. And with the poverty situation, there and the ethos where the values are no longer, pegged on issues of honesty and integrity, but pegged on material deliverance in the face of poverty. I think that is what was responsible, that an impoverished people, they don't respond to these issues of governance, and so they need to have the material circumstances addressed. And they were not kind of addressed for a range of reasons. And I agree that this is a matter that would require a separate discussion, but they were not addressed. And there's a shift in terms of the voting pattern to where values are that would permit for addressing the poverty issue, not necessarily from a government perspective, but from a perspective of an ethos which says, you get it by any means. And I think that is where the country, in a sense, has gone. Go to who can give you it by any means, but at the same time, it has not impacted the relationship with the PPP, because there is another body of people who do not create a fracturing of the ethnic question that now seem to suggest that they can do what was not done in the circumstance.
If I may, I mean, Vincent is quite right that we can't. This needs a whole program or two to deal with much more, because there's several factors. But I think there's some weakness in Vincent's argument. I don't think the level of poverty that exists today is worse than that existed in the past. In fact, I think it has been reduced, that a lot of the thing, poverty has been reduced in our country, considerably being reduced, I believe. And of course, I don't have figures to quote on some of these things. We can probably, if I know we will have this kind of discussion, we'll probably try to research those figures. But and the other thing too about the when you talk about the poverty, for a long time, at least for outside purposes, the PNC used to try to create the impression that only one set of people were in poverty. But if you look at the poverty scale in the country, it was not. It was there was no deliberate policy to have one set of people discriminated against or being in poverty, and so that never happened. And I would say that when you talk about poverty, the pockets of the poverty that still exists in our country, not as widespread as it used to be, but it's also affecting all sections of the population. Um, that people who live in poverty, not only Afro-Guyanese, Indo-Guyanese are in poverty, some Amerindian Guyanese are in poverty, but there's a great improvement. We can't also deny that there's a great improvement um, against poverty in the country. And I believe those are some of the things that are hitting the consciousness of people, and it's causing this shift more, even though you said that Win got a good body of votes at the last election, it is still, I believe, it still can be considered a shift towards the PPP and not away from the PPP.
Okay, so let's bring in Mr. Noah Singh now. But before he does, one cannot dispute the fact that yes, there was an increment of support from among the African base, PNC base to the PPP, and one really has to admire the political shrewdness and how astute the Vice President Bharat Jagdeo has been in capitalizing, exploiting the weakness of the PNC and in attracting a significant amount of support from the African base. Mr. Nohar Singh.
Thank you, Dr. Bisram, and gentlemen, thank you very much. I just want to say to the viewers tonight that we have a new program timing. We've moved away from daylight saving time, so the program now on Wednesday would be starting at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and of course that's 8 p.m. and 8 p.m. out in Guyana and Tobago. So that's our new timing. And of course, our Monday programs are suspended. It would resume at some point in the future. However, on the Wednesday programs, the first Wednesday of the month and the third Wednesday, I will be on, and in many cases, Dr. Bisram will also be on with me. And the second and last Wednesday of every month will be Dr. Rose. So all information for our viewers who are tuning in with us tonight. Gentlemen, Mr. President, thank you very much for being on with Globespan again. And again, Mr. Alexander, you have been a frequent guest on Globespan. And to both of you tonight, I really want to move away. And as Pers said, that it would probably take one or two programs to go back and do a post-mortem in the last election, the different shifts. But what I would like to discuss is really the new dynamics. And Pres, it was me who chose the topic, Guyana is a crossroad. Let me explain myself why. You see, Pres, with the new dynamics in the parliament now, 36 seats versus a new opposition leader, as Mr. Alexander pointed out, may be extradited. He has a very young set of parliamentarians with him. And of course, we have the well-known PNC APNU down to 12. So the dynamics have changed in the parliament. And so will be our laws, and so will be the way the country is governed. So to that aspect from the political side, and then I want to shift more to the economic side. We are at a crossroad from my viewpoint, Mr. President Ramutar, because of the fact of we gone from, as New York Times mentioned, from 0 to 60 in a very short period of time. And given the economic wealth now that's in the country, if the governance of the country or the way the country move forward, if there's not in a way where there could be an equitable distribution of whatever that truly means is up for discussion, or if there is not the decisions that are made so that the wealth could be distributed to one of the areas of where the PPP stood for. The PPP foundation was for the working class people, and also that of the other co-founder of Guyana, Forbes Burnham. Having said that also, so we have the political side, we also have the economic side, and then I don't think we have ever seen this type of military presence in the Caribbean. So we at the crossroad where Guyana needs guidance, it needs leadership, it needs some experience. And both of you gentlemen being so young within the Guyanese community, I thought that would be the basis for us to have this program tonight. So I want to start with you, President Ramutar. You had mentioned to me in one of our calls offline a few months ago how important it is for the parliamentarians in the opposition side to participate in committees, in the debates, etc., etc. So what guidance would you give this new set of parliamentarians that's going in that could help shape Guyana? That's my question for you.
When we spoke, it was in the context of inclusivity, because my position my position has been for a long time is that to speak mechanically about um, unity, and unity and many people are talking about or only seeing unity in the sense of shared governance inside the government, inside the executive itself. I have my doubts about that. I have never called when I was uh, I have never called for a unity with the PNC except outside when we had a very undemocratic situation and the PPP was looking for a way out to prevent the country from exploding when they were proposing national front government with on the basis of a program and so forth. But I feel that bringing everybody into the executive might very well slow down the country's development. It might very well affect the growth of the country. And I believe that the parliament can be used more efficiently to build that kind of involvement in the people. And I believe one of the mistakes of the opposition is that they have not been taking sufficient advantage of the committee system that was created by the PPP, the standing committees and you must also say we tend to look at areas more for criticism than sometimes to encourage, because some of the methodology that we have, I believe, is far superior to the methodology in many other parliaments in the world, including the American Congress and so forth. In America, when you election change, everything changes automatically. But in Guyana, the standing committees that we had, we that existed, it's chaired. All the committees are chaired by the government and opposition, and that in the past it used to be the PNC as the main opposition. So the chair, it wasn't a question that the ruling party was giving something inconsequential for the opposition to chair. They were giving them all the bodies rotated to have chairmanship and so forth. But I don't think that was used in the sense in the use to create the kind of involvement that you actually need in the society to have a greater involvement of the different forces into the administration of the government. That was the context that I was speaking to you about the parliamentary system that can be used, the committee system that can be used to create greater involvement of other forces within the society, within the government. But I
Yeah,
think the opposition didn't show a great amount of enthusiasm for that, and it didn't live up to the expectations that I would have had for the committee system to have to do that. If they can go back, if they can recognize that no, I know there's dynamics, things are changing. There's a certain new dynamics taking place in all the political
yeah,
parties. That you
yeah,
talk about equitable distribution of wealth, but that goes to a different other
yeah,
issue as well. It depends on what system you use to run
yeah,
the country. And if your system is a capitalist system, then it creates inequality. Naturally, it creates inequality
yeah,
um, that you can have. So we gotta therefore go and talk about
yeah.
systems of government.
And perhaps we'll come back to the economic side of this or the wealth side of it. But I thought it was such an important comment that you had made about how important it is for all the parliamentarians, particularly the opposition, I thought that was very mighty of you to suggest that the fact that the more involvement from the opposition side in the committees could also help construct and be able to bring about changes that would be positive. Hence the reason I brought it up. I always heard your views on shared governance, and your views are well taken in terms of what your views are there. I want to switch to Mr. Alexander. Mr. Alexander, a person of your experience, your knowledge, you've seen it all under the sun in Guyana. Um, what advice you would give to the opposition parliamentarians? And when I say the opposition, I'm not talking only about WIN, I'm talking collectively in terms of how, given under the situation that we are in, where winner take all politics, how would you encourage or how would you advise them in their roles as far as in this new 13 parliamentary session?
Well, I agree with the postulation of President Ramotar. Our Constitution provides lots of mechanisms for inclusion. But I think there has been resistance to that inclusion. And that resistance is not only an inertia on the part of the opposition, but I think that that resistance is also evident in terms of the disposition of the government. And so I think what is critical at this juncture is for the government to demonstrate a commitment into the spirit and the letter of our Constitution in terms of inclusion at the level of the Parliament to begin with. For example, I have heard complaints about sector committees which have asked the government to provide information. And almost years have passed and the information has not been provided. So I think that if there is a commitment to normalizing the operation of those bodies, that it can provide for the kind of interaction and discussion where we could seek to have some level of consensus. I recall that when I was a parliamentarian, for example, we adopted a principle which said that once, and I think even Dr. Jagan supported this position, that once a bill was of major significance, that bill would go to a select committee and provide for input both from the sides in Parliament and from external forces. We've had very little of that recently. So I really see us going back to that practice of what was intended when the Constitution was reformed and those committees were established, to have them actually do the work intended. And this requires a commitment from all sides. And indeed, it would be useful for the opposition persons to be probably more conscious of the role of those committees and probably more proactive in that regard. But certainly I do see the need for the environment, some change in the environment that would allow for those committees to do the work that was intended. And I would go further to argue that those of us who speak about shared governance, when we speak about shared governance, it includes the work of those committees.
Yeah.
It includes the work of those committees are critical. If we can't operationalize at the level of those committees, then certainly we'll have difficulty operationalizing in terms of bringing people together in the executive. And so I would really, really call for the parliamentarians to be far more committed to the work of the committees and for an environment of consensus to exist that allows for the work to happen at that level. I don't think that is the ultimate solution to the problem, but I think that can go a far way.
Thank you, Mr.
I think a great part of the solution to our problem is for a national conversation as to what the problem really is.
Yeah. Well,
And this is
Mr.
beyond the
Alexander,
parliament.
yeah.
This is beyond the parliament.
Thank you. Thank you. And the shared governance discussion and what the actual problem is could all be covered in a different program tonight. So the takeaway from that segment is that President Ramuntar recommended participation from all sides regarding the parliamentary committees. You also recommended, Mr. Alexander, an effort from both the government side and also from the opposition side. It's a young set of parliamentarians moving in under the wind as well. So hence the reason why all the advice that you gentlemen can give could certainly be helpful in shaping the nation. I want to welcome Mr. Sugrim, Suresh Sugrim. He's watching from Florida. And a comment here by Miss Lorna Campbell. And she said, yes, President Ramutar sounds very genuine in his remarks. And I am sure Mr. Alexander also has contributed meaningful so far to the discussion. I want to go to a video and just kind of shift us now away from the parliamentary politics and more to what's happening in our economy. And I want to go to the two founding fathers of the nation. Devin, you have the video. If you could just reel it one after each other, please.
That is to learn about how workers are exploited, how systems create oppression and exploitation, and what we need to do in order to bring about freedom and happiness for the people all over the world. They must see that they're proud of their nation and they're doing everything possible to look after the welfare of the nation and their communities. In that way, they will have good family life and good social upbringing in the country. Work for peace and harmony, especially in our country, a land of 6 peoples, that all the peoples must have an opportunity, equal opportunity to grow up and to have all the things in life that they want, to live a rich life. Not just material things, that is food, clothing and shelter, what are called the basic needs, but also other values like sports, like culture.
Because it is my conviction, my government's policy and my people's belief that Guyana and all other countries like Guyana ought to own and control their natural resources. These resources in bauxite, which are some of the richest in the world, in quality and in quantity, have been exploited by outsiders, and we have got the minimal benefits. And we proposed to the company that we took over the majority holdings. Apparently their power psychology precluded their being able to accept that, and we had to nationalize them, that's all, it's ours.
Prime Minister, many countries in the Caribbean, though I know not so much Guyana, have been forced to look to tourism for development. Do you see tourism as a help for development?
Well, every country must use what resources it has. Fortunately for us, God gave us dirty, murky waters, and we don't have to be the subject of these tourists. Tourism, to my mind, for Guyana is not a good thing at this stage, because it means the importation of false and wrong values and the creation of a nation of waiters. Tourism, I think, can be all right after the country has built its own economy and has an ethic, a mores of its own, and then you can afford to let people come all around the place.
Okay, so gentlemen, on that basis there, I just want to stress again Globespan fundamental principles to bring in all sides, both all political parties, all civil society opinions, and certainly we want to be able to have a very diverse program. That's been the principal understanding foundation for Globespan. So tonight, as we had played the reels of 2 of the founding fathers of Guyana, I believe President Ramutar, you would be the best to represent this, but growing up, we always understand that the PPP under Dr. Jagan, he always stood for the working class. He wanted the distribution of the wealth. He looked at the West in terms of being overpowered the colonialists. And if we heard the last part there of former President Forbes Burnham, when he talked about the tourism making waiters out of our people, he had a bigger vision for the people of Guyana other than just being waiters. But President Ramutai, you feel what I would like to ask your opinion about is that since post-oil, we've had a total revenue about $7.8 billion. Our budget from 2020 to 2024 cumulative is over $4.5 trillion. And that, in addition to that, we have clocked up about $7.7 billion in debt. Our national resource fund is about $3.3 billion. In the context, though, of the amount of money and the size of the economy, and I bring those numbers up just to sort of expand on the size of how the economy is growing at some massive pace, are you concerned in any way that there are certain part of this, our Guyanese population, that would be left back or not receiving the benefits yet from this large economy?
As I said, it's the system that you have in place. And obviously, the system that we have in place now, we're going more and more to a pure type of capitalist system. And that inevitably leads to some level of inequality. And I would go further to say it leads to chronic inequality. The government, that what I am seeing that the government is doing, they're trying their best to provide for people some of the basics that people talk about. In education, they pumped a lot of money into education. And health, they pumped a lot of money into health to make services available to ordinary people. And they're in infrastructure, I think it's very important. We had a deficit of infrastructure for a long time, and now they're trying to catch up, invest in those areas to catch up with the deficit that they had in infrastructure in the terms of development and so forth. I just want to say that one of the things that we have to be careful about, very careful about, and I believe that was one of Dr. Jagan's principal concern. I think he was one of the persons who were misunderstood a lot, and maybe some of the propaganda that was used against his politics led to that. He was not totally against private capital. What he was concerned about, more than anything else, was the sovereignty of the country should not be compromised, that no company should be so huge that can dictate. That was his fundamental concern, I believe, that was one of the reasons that he ran into a lot of problems with Bookers, because he felt that Bookers had an enormous influence in the society. At one time, they even controlled the parliament. So that was the question of sovereignty was very, very important to him, and it couldn't happen. Sovereignty couldn't happen without in a pure capitalist environment for countries like ours, where you have a very weak, very small and weak private sector, and you have to depend more and more on the foreign capital and so forth. So that was one of the concerns that he always had in mind about companies not growing so big that can dictate the direction in which your country is going. You got to remember that colonialism in our time was not only with governments from abroad, but they had the companies that actually used to run things in all the colonies. All over the world you look, it was companies that were being used to manage the development of the country. The other thing too, I think things have changed a lot too, from when you heard the comments of Dr. Jagan and Mr. Burnham, in the sense that at that time you had alternatives, or at least we believed that we had alternatives. The world was divided into two camps, and it was a question of where you align yourself towards to get development. And therefore, that is why you heard some of the comments that they have been making. Um, it reflected the period of time that they were talking about when you had a dynamic or socialist country. People forget too that at one time one of the biggest concerns in the United States was that the Soviet Union would have been overtaking them economically. Up to the mid 70s, the Soviet Union was growing in such a way that that was one of the big fear. And so you had alternatives to look at there, and that is why you could have talked about some of those things. But I think a lot has changed since then, and that is why the PPP under Dr. Jagan, his last period in government from 1992 to 1997, he was trying to carve out what was called a national democratic kind of state, where you will have all the classes involved, and where they will not be put in such a great disadvantage. And that is why the state, he felt it was important that the state have a role within the economy itself, because the state was kind of holding the position for the lower classes of people to balance them and so forth. And that was how he, in a new type of situation, was trying to grapple with the matter, that to create a kind of a in-between, a national democratic state, where he could have managed those type of things.
Thank you, President Ramutar. And I think on the basis of the working class people, that has been his fundamental principle that he stood on. Devin, while I'm going to Mr. Alexander, maybe you could run the reel with some of the major infrastructure that's taking place in Guyana, and also on the flip side of the coin, what's been happening in some of the communities, some of these pictures, some of these videos that we have. So there's seem to be a disparity that's growing, and that's why I came to this topic of Guyana is at a crossroad. We need to bring everyone into the mainstream. I want to answer Mr. Roy Kingston, though. He posed the question, when will you invite the WIN party as part of your guest list? Mr. Kingston, we've been inviting members of the PPP. We have been inviting members of WIN. We have been inviting. Some of them are being very selective when and how they come on this program. It is one of the few programs, Mr. Kingston, that whereby we try to bring a diverse conversation. And unfortunately, some folks want to be on where they could be able to dominate on only their viewpoints, as you could. But yes, we do extend invitation to all. Mr. Alexander, I want to go to you, and then I want to come back to President Ramutar, and then switch over to Dr. Bisram. But Mr. Alexander, your knowledge, your experience, and your advice here, are we looking towards an economy, and that's why I named it at the crossroad, decisions that are made in this second term of oil and gas. Remember, the first term on the oil and gas has passed us. We're in the second term now. We are coming close to 1 million barrels per day, probably the fourth largest producer of oil. How is it that this government or this parliament collectively can move forward where the people, all the people in all the different communities of Guyana can benefit? What would be your advice, Mr. Alexander?
You know, as President Lamarcus spoke, it struck me that with Exxon, we have in many regards returned to a situation where a foreign company is that powerful that they are virtually determining what happens in the country. And he's admitted that we have gone into a system that is a highly capitalist, classical capitalist system. And in those circumstances, what you have happening is the emergence of a dominant ownership capitalist class. And in the context of Guyana, one has to bear in mind that if one looks at the economy, where the ownership resides, and therefore in that class configuration, unfortunately, we end up also having a relative ethnic configuration, notwithstanding the fact that there are a lot of poor Indo-Guyanese and a lot of poor Afro-Guyanese, but in the class circumstance of the capitalist system in Guyana, there's also an ethnic issue that arises. Now, on the question of development, I think the problem is that we have not adopted the relevant model. There basically are three models, macro models for development. There is the growth pole model, which really sponsors capitalism, where infrastructure is provided to encourage investment. And we seem to be largely doing that. But the other model would be the command model, where the state is involved in all parts of the economy. And we have, in some regards, it's a kind of dichotomy. Whilst we have moved away from that, saying that private enterprise is the growth, the facilitator of growth, so to speak, the engine of growth, we do have the state heavily involved in terms of the national economy. And so in some regards, there's still a kind of a command operation that we have. The third approach is a community development approach, which does not negate the role of private enterprise, does not negate the role of the state, but seeks to ensure that at the community level, entrepreneurship and economic activities are encouraged. And we seem, I would argue, not to be focusing on that, because that is the one that, in fact, lands the opportunity for the ordinary people to be involved in the economy and to benefit from the economic growth and development. And in fact, the co-op movement is a movement that can facilitate that kind, because the ordinary man does not individually have the capital base to go deeply into business. But if they were to pool their resources in various ways, for example, if you talk about rice farmers, in terms of pooling their resources, they can have the individual farms, but then they could collectively have a pool of machinery, so that without having to have an individual capital, they can have access to the machinery that can allow them to be deeply involved in the agricultural activities they want to be involved in. And in that way, more of the ordinary people can become involved in those activities. So I think that the community approach to development, which emphasizes incubating the people's involvement in economic activities, where they can become, for example, where we have Exxon, where these bodies of people could become the service providers to Exxon, rather than have Exxon relying on not other private enterprise, so to speak, individual facilitator. And in a lot of instances in Guyana, these are foreign companies that have come in, when the state could play a role in allowing the people themselves to incorporate, to provide those services, whether it be agricultural service, goods and services, other goods and services, so they have a stake in the economy and are not reduced to mere workers.
Thank you.
And I think it is critical for us to look at the economic model we have engaged
If I may,
and to shift it.
if I may come in here, I think I agree that I'm not ruling out the kind of models that the community-based model. It has its say, but I don't think it will bring the kind of a changes that I think is very important. I think, to be very bold, I would say you've got to look at models like the Chinese model. I think China, probably more than any other country in the world, grasp the complexity of the world situation and how things are moving. And they have been able to use the market very effectively in the allocation of resources. But where power lies, it lies in the hands of the working class people as represented by the party. And that is one of the reasons that China has had such phenomenal growth and sustained growth for a long time in the society. And you see other countries that are following that model, at least one country that I can think about off the top of my head that is following that model and is doing extremely well is Vietnam. Vietnam itself is following a similar kind of model where the emphasis is more on the working class and the working people, and where the state still controls. Well, put it this way: they have a totally new approach to what is public property. For them, in the past, when you talk about public property, you think only about state property. But if you look at China, Vietnam's position, they don't only think about public property being state property, but they have municipal property, but public property, different forms
Yeah,
of public property, a
yeah,
variety of form of, just like you have a variety of form of private ownership, huge
yeah,
cooperation,
yeah.
and exactly that. China
Thank you
has
for
used
that.
that effectively.
Yeah.
All right, you seems to be in a hurry to get me off.
No, no, not at all, Prez. I was smiling when you were talking because you sound like the true protege of Dr. Jagan,
No,
state
no, no, no.
enterprises, and no, no, I welcome your comments. It's just that we got about 20 minutes more to go, and I had so many other things I wanted to get across to you. But yeah, go ahead and finish your point, Prez.
No, no, no. I'm going to move ahead. Move. The point I
Okay.
want to make is this. The point I want to make is this: is that the models that have been most successful, models like the Chinese model like what's taking place in Vietnam at the moment. Um,
And
those are
you're
the
well in
models that have
tune.
been most successful, despite
You-
what Bishram might say.
I,
You're well in tune. Vishram, you'll get your chance in a second. Let me just couple more things, and and I'll give it
Could I
over
make
to
a,
you.
could I make a very quick point on the argument about the Chinese model? 2 points. One, I think that the Chinese model and the Vietnamese model, which have been referred to, there is a cultural element in those models. There's a cultural element which we do not have present,
Point well
and,
taken.
and, and
Point.
we can't ignore that. Secondly, in some regards, I think if you look at what's happening in Guyana, there's an element of the Chinese model insofar as the political system is tending towards command and control, whilst at the same time facilitating private enterprise. But I think that the difference here is the cultural element, where in the Chinese model, there is a lot more scope for redistributive processes as opposed to the capitalist model that we've embraced, where there's less scope for the redistributive processes.
Point well taken. Just a comment I want to read from Mr. Sheikh. He said, good night, gentlemen. Interesting, balanced discussion. This is the kind of programming we must continue to have. Literate, mature, and relevant. Keep it up, Globespan. And of course, Mr. Sheikh, we don't have all of those colorful language, your mother this and your father that. So I do want to ensure that Globespan continue here. Prez, Mr. Alexander, there's so much more I wanted to talk about. Critical support, that has been something that has been a cornerstone, if I am correct to say that, Prez, that Dr. Jagan had mastered critical support. And I wanted to touch a little about that. Anytime we criticize from within, how quickly, they try to shut us up. We shouldn't have an opinion. And I always felt that critical support could be a way we could grow. We could be able to accept criticism and not, when it's suitable or when it's good for the country and good for the people. But we are not going to be able to touch for much on that. I wanted to talk a little about the depletion of our resources. A lot of attention is on the Mohammeds and the amount of and the extraditions, etc. But the backdrop of that, Prez, and Mr. Alexander and Dr. Bisram, and to all of our viewers, the backdrop behind all of that is the amount of gold that are leaving our country without being accountable for. the amount of other resources that are not being. So the Guyanese people are being fleeced in so many different ways. And all this sort of the front end of it is, yes, there's this OFAC sanction, etc., but the back end of that is, what are we really losing? So before I turn it over to Bisram, I just wanted to endorse also, and we'll play a very quick commercial or a video. Professor Griffith, he wrote a very nice book. He's been doing a lot of writing lately. Evelyn Griffith, please support his book. It's available on Amazon. He's done quite a bit, and these are all outstanding gentlemen within our Guyanese community that we need to continue to support. So after the video, Dr. Bisram, you could take over, but go ahead, Devon.
Oil is transforming Guyana, and the entire Caribbean is watching. But beneath the promise of prosperity lies a deeper risk, the rising threat of climate change. Oil and Climate Change in Guyana's Wet Neighborhood explores this high-stakes intersection of economics, politics, and the environment. Author Yves Law Lloyd Griffith takes you inside the region's oil ambitions and reveals how climate vulnerability could shape its future. This isn't just a policy debate. It's about coastlines vanishing, livelihoods shifting, and choices that will define generations. Packed with insight, data, and sharp analysis, this book is essential reading for anyone who cares about the Caribbean's future. Are we on a path to progress or peril? Dive into the story that affects us all. Oil and Climate Change in Guyana's Wet Neighborhood by Yves Law Lloyd Griffith.
Dr. Bisram, 1 second, please. I just want to reinstate again that this book is available on Amazon. Please support our fellow Guyanese. I also want to say to all of our viewers that we do invite all the political parties. Many folks do come, some don't come. However, we'll continue to invite them. And I just want to express my gratitude to Mr. Alexander, who has had so much abuses on this program. He's called so many different names, but yet his contribution continues, and he continued to attend this program every time we call upon him. He's made some significant comments. On one of his previous comments, he mentioned how important it is for the diaspora contribution, also our religious sector contribution to the growth of Guyana. And I must say to President Ramutar, someone I've always listened to, someone that has always made, in talking to him many times, it's like talking to men of such wide array of experience and knowledge. And every time we call on President Ramutar, he comes on individually. He does not come on as a PPP. He does come on individually, and how important it is to have your experience, your knowledge, both of you gentlemen, and your contribution, because Guyana is in the past. The past must be the past. We cannot be looking in a rear view mirror for too long. We must have a sight to the future, and given all of your experiences, certainly you are able to contribute towards our growth and a better Guyana for all. Dr. Bisram, go ahead.
Well, I thank you. Thank you for those two brief videos on the remarks of the former presidents, Forbes Burnham and Chetty Chagan. Unquestionably, they were fantastic, outstanding nationalists of Guyana. I don't think they would have approved their certain policies today. I'm sure Donald Ramutar and Vincent Alexander would agree with me on that. Reference were made to the Chinese model and the Vietnamese model, but we must not forget that these were also community-based models that received the support and encouragement and even funding by the respective government to encourage community-based development. We also must not forget the role of the state in laying down the necessary infrastructure for private enterprise to flourish. And so therefore, as Vincent stated, and for which I am in agreement, there is need for some form of encouragement in community, for there to be community development. And going hand in hand with community development, is the co-op. I mean, the co-op was tried in Guyana and it wasn't quite successful, but that was a different era, and when resources were short. I think we now have the resources that we can encourage more cooperatives, um, especially that it's very, very difficult to grow food cost effective in Guyana on very small scale farming. So you need various farmers to come together and, as Vincent said, to share their equipment, so that they could be more prosperous, especially at a time when food security is becoming a major challenge. Gentlemen, I don't know if you want to add anything to these remarks. First, Donna Ramotar and then Vincent.
Okay. The, I think the point that I'm not seeming to get across is that the community-based project, while it is good, it has to act as a complementary aspect for transformation purposes. But by itself, it doesn't bring the kind of a transformation that you're looking at, ending poverty, et cetera, et cetera. It contributes. It makes a contributing thing. But the whole question of the role of the state is very, very, it's principally important when you're talking about you want to talk about a developmental type of state and so forth. And you're not correct that co-op was not successful in this country. The co-op made a very big contribution from 1957 to 1964 in this country. I think, but again, it might be unfair to me to raise some of these points because I think it needs a fuller debate. Some of the problems that it had afterwards, I think, had to do more with politics and with maybe trying to redistribute wealth in a way that was not practically sustainable. That had some of the problems in later years. But if you go back to the records, you will see that co-op made a huge contribution in agriculture and in several other areas together. And not only that type of co-op, but a kind of a co-op of self-help. You know how many schools and clinics were built in this country with co-op, community co-ops and self-help and so on and so forth, at a time when the country was being blocked by having any kind of resources. And the fact that the country, the economy continued to grow in that circumstances had to do, some of it, the contribution had to do with how production was organized, and co-op played a big role at that stage. So it's not true that co-op was a total failure in Guyana. The other point what you raised was including what, just repeat again for me if you don't mind. The other
Community-based development and co-op.
Yeah, okay, but no, I think I made the point.
It's support for them.
It's just the only difference I will have with you is that it was a complementary system. It was not the main force that created the dynamism of the change. But it is important. I'm not trying to minimize its importance of involving people in the life in their own economic life and in the life of the development of their community and the society at large.
Well, Vincent, I mean, both Forbes, Barnum, and Cherry Jagan were promoters of self-help and co-ops and community-based development. You want to add anything to that?
Well, when I ventured into the comment on community-based, I was not suggesting that one would completely discard the good pole approach and the centrist approach. Indeed, it has to be a kind of a tripod. But what has happened, I think, is that we have gone in largely in the capitalist direction and have not been given the kind of environmental support to the community-based development, which has not rightly been expressed to have two elements to it. There is the business element, but there is also the self-help other element. So yes, it has to be complementary. The state has got a role to play, in terms of fashioning how the economy should emerge. totally. Private enterprise has got a role to play, but I think there's a critical role to play as well in the community base. And they're complementary insofar as the community base will be able to relate also to the private enterprise, the big enterprises, in terms of provision of goods and services. And so there's an interrelationship. But what the community base does is provides an opportunity for redistribution. For example, in the gold industry, much more work could be done in terms of the Amerindian communities coming together to collectively be involved in the gold industry, as opposed to these big companies coming and having large acres. The state can facilitate the people engagement in those industries so that the people can be beneficiaries directly from the exploitation of our resources. And in terms of the way we see private enterprise, for example, you have Exxon, and I might be naive here, but I ask myself, why isn't this the precondition that if you're going to have Exxon, which is a company that has shareholding, that we don't have an arrangement where Guyanese, there's an allocation of shares that can be made available to Guyanese. Now, in that way, Guyanese can become direct beneficiaries, and immediately it starts to rule out some of the issues of the Exxon people taking away all of the profits, because then, irrespective of the arrangement with the government, with us being shareholders, we will be the beneficiaries of what is now considered to be what goes to the private investors. So I think we need to be look at the way in which we involve the people in economic activity, even complementing private, complementing the state to their benefit. And forgive me for making this point. Given the nature of Guyana, from an ethnic perspective, then it can also start to address that ethnic problem, because our class structure has a heavy ethnic element and therefore raises the ethnic question. Decentralization of economic activity into the community can also start to address that issue, because in a sense, the community development also addresses the class structure of our economy.
But gentlemen, it's almost time. So if you have any final words on Guyana, the crossroad, the 13th Parliament.
Gentlemen, before you give your final take on this, just a couple of comments I want to read. Well, Mr. Sital wrote, respect to Mr. Vincent Alexander. Always know Vincent as a clean, decent person. Excellent work, Mr. Vincent Alexander. We love you. Well, you have a big fan there, Mr. Alexander. He also talked about politically, how racially, politically we are divided. And then we had Mr. Paul Singh posted, Dr. Jagan always spoke about how to uplift those at the grassroots. So those are a few of the comments that are coming in. To all our viewers tonight, before these gentlemen give their closing comments, I hope we have accomplished a partial of our objective tonight. We kind of wanted the program to stay away from all that has happened before and look towards these well-scholared, experienced gentlemen to lead us with some ideas. President Ramata talked about the China, Vietnam. Mr. Alexander spoke about community development, and I kind of really like also Mr. Alexander talked about the decentralization. So I hope it was helpful. We'll continue to have our programs on Wednesday night, and we look forward for you guys joining us. I would like to, I guess, call on President Ramata to make his closing comments, and also right after that, Mr. Alexander. And one last thing, I've forgotten to keep thanking Devon. Devon has been a very sincere and a very instrumental in keeping Globespan going every week. So Devon, we want to thank you for all your efforts that you have contributed towards Globespan. Go ahead, President Ramata.
But I would say that the the fact that the last 5 years our country took a bit of a leap forward, and I think that they have the possibility of going even faster in this period of time, particularly since the PPP has a much more comfortable majority in the National Assembly that they could work with. Just I just hope that it doesn't lead to um, run roughshod over the minority, but to use some of the mechanisms that are in parliamentary available in Parliament to have greater involvement and greater inclusiveness. One of the things in this Parliament that can be a little bit of a negative, I think in the opposition there is a lot of inexperience now. There's not the same kind of experience that we had in the past in the opposition. There's a lot of new people, and those who have experience in using parliamentary tactics. I'm sure they will learn, but at this point in time, I think that's one of the disadvantage of the opposition, not only in their numbers, but I think that this group is pretty new and very inexperienced, and I just hope that the government don't necessarily take advantage of that to push through things, but to probably help them along, to help them to make a better contribution into the country itself. But I think that we have a good future. There's always areas you can criticize, and I myself implicitly criticize the total capitalist type of development that we're on. I don't think that that's the best part, the best road. I recognize that things have changed and you can't do things that you used to do in the past, but there needs to be some more guidance and some more attention in opening the possibility for greater say on the part of the working people in the management of the state as such. So I think that we have a good future, we have a good basis to build on, and I think there's a lot of good reason for optimism in the country at this point in time.
Well, Mr. Alexander, just before you comment, I just want to say to President Ramutar, your comments are well taken. There's a level of maturity there that we would like to welcome more and more generally in our political discussions, and particularly the point where you mentioned about the majority that the PPP holds right now. It's a great opportunity for them to be able to make changes. These are my words, not yours, and be able to be much more effective in a broader and much more well-mannered for the country. Go ahead, Mr. Alexander, sorry.
Given the constraint of time, I feel we have to look to this country in a manner that sees the private enterprise as the engine of growth. And sometimes one can also include the cooperative sector in that private enterprise. It should be seen as the engine of growth. The state should be a facilitator of development. And I think that whilst we have discussed the models in China and Vietnam, I think we ought also to pay some attention to the Scandinavian countries and the models that they have embraced. Countries like Norway and the way in which they've dealt with their natural resource funds, for example, ensuring that there's some sustainability in terms of growth and development. I think we need to turn this nation into a nation of the politics of development rather than the politics of power. And in that regard, we should look to the parliament and the parliamentary parties embracing the politics of development as opposed to what has pertained the politics of power, which does not address the question, a fundamental question of the nation's development.
Well, thank you. And I must say that it's been quite a discussion. We definitely would love to have you gentlemen here again. And one of the big takeaway again from both of these gentlemen, what they were very clear about, is that all the opposition parliamentarians, they need to participate in the committees, and they need to be able to be fully effective in those areas in all the opportunities the parliament would offer them. Dr. Bisram, any last
No,
comments from your
no
end?
word. I thank you again for this opportunity to
I see you dressed to fly again.
yes.
All right, good. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much to all our viewers. Thank you again. We'll see you next Wednesday at 7 p.m. Globespan 24/7. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good night, all.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Thank you.